I want to welcome you to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our fancy warning graphic here that says the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. We sometimes say that we might curse or drink an adult beverage to reinforce this concept. However, we normally never do. My name is Dave Beatty. I am one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of. Certain things like Justice League of America, Grifter, Batman Incorporated, a lot of other fun comic book projects. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks watching and also listening at home some of the fun things you've worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That is not Bass God 14, that is Bass God 14, as in like a bass guitar. And I am the Chief Financial Officer of Bad Bob Productions, which is a small production company in Arizona. And I am also the Associate Producer of the feature film Occupants, which features Star Trek actor Robert Picardo and is currently available for free on Tubi.
Very cool. So again, because we're using our slightly augmented new format, we're going to start off by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. This would be episode 6. We're going to start off with our general impressions of the episode before kind of getting into some spoilerific discussion. Unfortunately, we don't have a fancy Picard graphic. I ran out of time. Oh, we'll use that one. But we're going to start by talking about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial impressions of this episode of Picard?
General impressions. Well, I will say that I felt more positive about this episode than the last episode. That's not exactly a high bar to set, unfortunately, because the last episode was, I think, very controversial and had some pretty low points in Trek, honestly. But I do think that this episode was better, and I do think it actually holds up better than a lot of the other episodes in the series in general. I wouldn't necessarily put it up there exactly with episode 1, which I think we both agreed on is probably the best episode of the series so far. But it's kind of close for the most part. I thought after the first act or so, I thought that it moved decently. There was some issues I had with the first act that I thought were just unnecessary and kind of made it drag. That's kind of some of the unevenness of the show overall, I think, is that there are parts of this episode, and there's part of this series in general, where you feel like things are being rushed, and then the next minute you feel like things are going on way too long. Like why are they taking so long to explain this very simple thing that's going on in the show? But why are they using quasi pseudo techno speak when it's not necessary? Why are they inventing new terms when it's not necessary? That was a big problem with episode 5, in my opinion, when they were trying to explain the heist, if you will, the con that they were doing. It was very straightforward, and they just took forever to explain it, and I was completely confused over a very straightforward plan. So there was some of that in this episode as well. But like I said, I thought once you got over the first act or so, it seemed like it picked up a lot. And there were parts that were going real fast and actually were holding my attention, and I was actually getting kind of excited about. So, and I can't say that about a lot of the rest of Picard, unfortunately. But I did have those moments in this one, particularly at the end. I thought that the ending was somewhat exciting and all that kind of stuff, where I was kind of almost on the edge of my seat at the end of the episode. I still really dislike Raffi. I'm really going to get into it in our deep dive about my issue with her, and specifically in this episode that I think was a real low point, and could have been handled completely differently. But Rios seems okay. I think he got through the episode okay. The scientist girl, I think she's ruined. She was ruined by the previous episode, and she's literally like damaged goods now. Mm. And so I was not impressed with her character. For the first time, I think in this series, we had someone see Picard on screen for the first time, and they didn't treat him like he was a big jerk. We actually had a moment where someone was reintroduced to Picard and wasn't like, you bastard, you did this and this, and this is the first time that's happened. We're on episode 6. We're over halfway in the series. And for the very first time, somebody actually treats Picard the way that the fans would treat Picard,
right.
And that was a good moment. That's probably one of the reasons I actually like this episode. And so it was a good moment. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Hugh appears in this episode, and I think Hugh did a very good job. I think he's a high point. I think he is the only character so far, in my opinion, other than some moments with Picard himself, where I really felt that he was actually embodying the spirit of Trek. Right. Where the character was actually doing very Trek-like things. I think this is the first time I've seen that. So overall, I would say that my impression is pretty good actually of this episode. I do have some major issues in the first act, and I am going to get into them in the deep dive. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I see that Orville Nation is in the chat. And wanted to say thank you, PJ, for stopping by. You're always welcome on the show, by the way, PJ. If you ever want to come on the show, just let us know, because we'd love to hear from you. In fact, we have some news to give about you later when we start talking a little bit more about news from the channel itself. But PJ, you're always welcome to join in, and I'm sure you have a lot of opinions about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard as well. But yeah, overall, I would say that it's kind of more of kind of a high point in the series. At least I feel like the story is finally really moving. It's taken us, like I said, we're over the halfway point of the first season, and finally, I feel like the story is really moving.
Wow, that light is really strong. Sorry, everyone, I'm still messing with everything here, which I shouldn't be doing live on the show. So I wanted to mention, too, I want to thank Orville Nation, PJ, for commenting. As always, well, at least for the time being right now, I want to mention that I want to thank everyone who comes into the comment and actually leaves a comment and kind of joins the discussion for the show. I like to encourage people to do that. So we had this. This is going to be the sketch card we give away during this episode. It's kind of unusual because it's Mighty Mouse. There's the artist proof thing there on the back, and it'll make more sense as we dive further into the episode. But I wanted to mention that real quickly, that we are still doing that with this episode. My impressions of Picard. Let's see. I liked this episode. I actually, there was a lot about this episode I enjoyed, quite a bit. I mean, it was fun. There was a lot of aspects of this that were fun. I enjoyed this episode. I'd have to say this is one of the better episodes for me. I wouldn't say this is the highlight of the series. I think episode 1 is still the highlight, but I quite enjoyed this episode. There was a couple things I didn't care for, but as we get into the deep dive, we can get further into that. But overall, I'd have to say this was an enjoyable episode of Picard for me personally, and that's my general impressions of of this episode. So
Yeah,
I don't have.
I'm definitely with you there. I think, especially with how it ended. I have some things I can nitpick, and I will. But overall, I do think it was an enjoyable episode. But I did have some issues with it, especially as I said in the first act.